Welcome, gentle soul, to the sleeping hourglass. This is the story of Saigō Takamori, the man many call the last samurai. You will not hear battles shouted here, nor the clash of steel or the roar of horses. Only footsteps through morning fog, letters written with trembling hands, and a man walking, slowly, toward a farewell he never truly gave. You're always welcome to subscribe or leave a gentle comment, not out of obligation, but as a way to keep this cozy space glowing. The mist rests low over Kagoshima like a breath not yet exhaled. You can hear the faint hush of waves along the bay, the quiet rustle of bamboo stirring beneath the weight of early light. Somewhere in the hills, a rooster crows, as if reminding time to move forward. And yet, down here, time hesitates, caught between a memory and a mourning. Saigō Takamori stands with his back to the sea. His robes are simple. His hands, folded quietly before him, are thick with the memory of work, of battle, of things long put away. His eyes do not seek the horizon. They rest on the mountains, calm, unblinking, as if they are the only things that have not betrayed him. You walk beside him, or perhaps you only imagine you do. But it feels real, this shared silence, this ancient pause between worlds. He does not speak, he does not need to. The quiet around him is its own language. Once, he was the sword of Satsuma, a boy with calloused hands who rose to lead a revolution. He brought down the Tokugawa shogunate not with cruelty, but with conviction. He bowed before emperors. He wrote letters like prayers. He believed, stubbornly, beautifully, in the soul of a nation too wary to believe in itself. And now, here he is, a man shaped by war, standing in the lull after the storm. The Meiji government, young and electric with change, rushes forward like a river breaking free of stone. Railroads spread like veins. Telegraph wires hum like nervous thoughts overhead. Western suits replace silk. And Saigō remains still, watching, a man made of quiet and questions. He no longer walks the halls of power. He has returned home, not in disgrace, but in distance. He has seen what progress demands. He has felt the chill of friends turning strangers in the name of reform. And though he does not curse them, he does not follow them either. You sit with him beneath a cypress tree, and for a moment, it feels as though you are sitting with time itself. His breathing is deep and slow, the kind of breath that only comes from men who have already survived their own ending. The sword at his side is ceremonial now, more symbol than weapon. It sleeps in its scabbard, untouched. The steel is polished, but not used. It is not needed, and yet it is not forgotten, like him. In the village below, a child cries. A gate swings open. A pot clinks against a wooden table. Life goes on, indifferent to those it leaves behind. But Saigō listens. He hears every sound as if it holds meaning, as if even the simplest moments are messengers of something deeper. At night, he still writes, letters that are part journal, part elegy. His brush moves slowly across rice paper, tracing thoughts too heavy for speech. He writes to old friends in Tokyo, though he knows they will not answer. He writes to himself, perhaps, or to the part of him that still believes in honor without power. He does not hate the future. He simply cannot walk into it barefoot, carrying a sword that no longer fits its sheath. In his garden, dogs sleep in the sun, chickens dart through the grass. The earth here is soft, volcanic, generous. He plants radishes. He harvests tea. He teaches children how to read. And in all of it, there is dignity, a quiet kind that does not need applause to survive. They call him sensei. Now, not general, not minister, just teacher. And he accepts the name as one might accept rain, humbly, without protest. But even in his lessons, there is the shadow of something unsaid. He teaches not only history, but grief. Not only poetry, but presence. He is a bridge no longer walked across, but still remembered. A lantern in daylight, offering light even when it is not needed. And yet, the world does not stop. In Tokyo, policies are made, taxes rise, conscription laws are passed. The samurai class, once proud, once feared, is dissolved like ink in water. The very soul of the old Japan is being rewritten page by page. Saigō watches this from afar. He does not interfere. Not yet. Still, there is a quiet tension in him. Not anger. Something older. Sorrow, perhaps. Or the ache of knowing that silence can be a form of betrayal too. The wind picks up. Bamboo leaves shimmer like the sleeves of ghosts. He turns, slowly, and walks back toward his home. You follow, footsteps soft against the path. He does not speak, but something in the way he moves says, "I will not raise my sword again, not unless I must." Because sometimes the hardest thing a warrior can do is wait. Because sometimes the truest act of honor is not battle, but restraint. And so he waits, not for orders, not for glory, but for the sound, distant, inevitable, of something breaking. The mist over Kagoshima begins to lift, just enough to glimpse the shadows stirring in the east. And in that pale light, one question lingers. What does a man become when his world moves on without him? The air in Kyoto holds a different kind of stillness. Not the stillness of peace, but of breath held tight before something shatters. It is the late 1860s, and the land hums with quiet urgency. Men move in silence through wooden corridors, robes whispering along polished floors. Behind them, centuries of rule begin to crumble like old lacquer. The Tokugawa shogunate, a regime that once felt eternal, is folding in on itself. And in the soft flicker of temple lanterns, Saigō Takamori watches history exhale. He was not born to rebellion. Loyalty is stitched into the seams of his soul. Loyalty to Satsuma, to order, to the quiet dignity of service. And yet, here he stands, sword at his side, commanding men not in defense of the shogun, but against him. How strange the road that leads a man to undo what he once swore to uphold. The Bakumatsu period, the final years of the shogunate, is a time of fractured loyalties and uneasy alliances. The black ships of Commodore Perry have already come and gone, carving open Japan's long-closed ports like a wound. Foreign treaties are signed under pressure. The people murmur, the daimyo grow restless, and beneath it all, a hunger stirs, not just for power, but for renewal. The idea of the emperor, once distant, almost mythical, begins to glow again in the hearts of those who dream of a unified Japan. Saigō is not the first to speak of restoration, but when he speaks, people listen. He is not eloquent. He is not cunning, but he is deeply, visibly sincere. He believes in something larger than himself, and in that belief others find shelter. The Satsuma and Choshu domains, longtime rivals, now find common cause. Old enemies become allies beneath the banner of imperial return. Letters pass like doves between hidden courtyards. Armies are formed not to conquer, but to restore. Or so they hope. The year is 1868. Snow has melted. Plum blossoms open. And from Kyoto, the cry goes out, "Return power to the emperor. Let the old world fall." Saigō rides at the head of the imperial forces, his face calm, his eyes steady. The banners behind him do not bear his name. They bear the chrysanthemum, symbol of the throne, of something older than politics. He does not ride for himself. He rides for an idea, a Japan reborn. The march to Edo is slow, deliberate. There is little bloodshed at first. The Tokugawa forces, weary and fragmented, fall back, and when at last Saigō stands at the edge of Edo Castle, it is not with the thirst of a conqueror, but with the weight of someone who knows the price of victory. Negotiations begin. There is talk of surrender. There is a pause. A moment where all could burn or all could heal, and then a choice. Katsu Kaish, a Tokugawa official, meets with Saigō in quiet chambers. The conversation is short, measured. Two men, bound by duty, choosing not to let their city become a grave. Edo is spared. The shogunate dissolves not with fire, but with a bow. It should be a triumph, a moment of pride. But for Saigō, it feels like standing in a garden after a storm. The petals are on the ground, delicate and ruined. Yes, the branches remain. Yes, something new will bloom, but the air is heavy with what has fallen. The shogunate is gone. A new era has begun. And yet, as the emperor returns to Kyoto with full authority restored, as proclamations are read and titles are changed, Saigō feels a quiet ache beneath the celebration. This was not a war of anger. This was a war of necessity, and even necessity wounds. He walks the grounds of Edo Castle one last time, sandals brushing over old stones. The shoji screens whisper as they slide shut behind him. He bows once deeply, not to the castle, but to all that came before it, to the years, the rituals, the quiet obedience that once defined a nation. Outside, the wind stirs fallen blossoms along the riverbanks. They do not protest. They simply drift. Later, in a letter to a friend, Saigō writes not of glory, but of sorrow. He speaks of the weight of decisions made in silence, of how even right choices can leave a man hollow, of how every ending carries with it a mourning, even for the parts of history we believe must pass. The Meiji Restoration is now more than an idea. It is reality. A country begins to rebuild itself, modernize, centralize, unify. But the thread between what was and what will be is thin, frayed, trembling in the wind. And in that space, that hush between falling and becoming, Saigō stands, still loyal, still uncertain, still carrying the silence of petals. But petals cannot fall forever. And in the new government, the emperor's young eyes begin to open, wide enough to see, but not yet to understand. The court in Kyoto is quiet, but not with reverence, with uncertainty. Golden screens glimmer faintly behind paper walls. Sandalwood smoke coils upward in thin, uncertain spirals. Outside, the spring wind stirs through the gardens, lifting the smell of plum blossoms into the hall. But inside, time moves differently, as if holding its breath. At the far end of the chamber, the boy sits. He is only 15. His robes are heavy for someone so young, brocade patterns tracing imperial myths down his sleeves. His hands are folded, resting in his lap like leaves unfallen. He does not speak. He only watches. With eyes too large, too solemn, too still for a child. This is Matsuhito, known now as the Meiji Emperor. His name will echo across centuries. But here, in this moment, he is simply a boy born into the eye of a storm. Saigō Takamori kneels before him. Not alone, there are others, ministers, generals, scholars, all bowing, all waiting. But the space between Saigō and the throne feels heavier than the others. There is no fear in his face, only something quieter, recognition. A kind of grief, tender and deep, for the burden this child now carries. The restoration is official. The shogunate has fallen. The emperor is sovereign once more, at least in name. But the boy does not rule, not truly, not yet. He listens to his advisors, signs what is placed before him, and asks polite questions in a voice barely louder than the wind. And still, his presence is undeniable. There is something magnetic in his silence, as if centuries of longing for unity have found their vessel in this fragile frame. Saigō watches him, not as a subject, not as a soldier, but as a man looking into the distance and seeing not a person but a symbol. A promise, perhaps, or a warning. He remembers the journey here, the long ride from Edo, the quiet of victory clouded by the ache of what had been lost. He remembers the faces of fallen comrades, the letters left unanswered, the unspoken things behind every bow. And now, here is the end of that road, a boy seated on a throne older than memory. He wonders what the child sees in return. Does the emperor see a general, a relic, a teacher, a threat? In the moonlit evenings, when court disperses and the boy retires to quieter rooms, Saigō walks the gardens alone. The stones crunch softly beneath his feet. Lanterns flicker among the trees like fireflies. It is in these moments, without ceremony or decree, that he contemplates what loyalty means now. Loyalty to the emperor once meant loyalty to tradition, to the old gods, the old codes, the unbroken line. But this new court is changing fast. Western advisors appear like shadows, murmuring about railways and rifles, banking systems and bureaucracies. There is a smell of foreign ink in the air. Even the emperor's language is shifting. Classical poetry replaced by political memos. And still, the boy sits, watches, learns. Saigō sees the weight gather in his posture. He sees the sorrow behind the stillness. Matsuhito is too young to command, but old enough to understand what is being taken in his name. That is its own kind of exile. Sometimes the two meet in the gardens, unplanned. A chance encounter beneath pine branches or near the koi pond. On those rare evenings they speak, not as ruler and subject, but as two people caught between errors. The conversations are short, quiet. The emperor asks about Saigō's childhood, about the southern provinces, about battle. He listens with the hunger of someone searching for something no tutor can teach. And Saigō, though careful, speaks with gentle honesty. He tells of mountains and dogs and the old chants of Kagoshima. He speaks not of war, but of silence, the kind that follows it. The boy listens, always listening. Once, Saigō brings him a sword, an old blade, polished but weathered. It belonged to a forgotten samurai from the Satsuma rebellion. He offers it not as a gift, but as a memory. This, he says, was carried by a man who believed in things that no longer exist. But the blade still cuts. The emperor holds it carefully, reverently, then returns it without a word. In the months that follow, Saigō begins to see the changes in the court accelerate. The new leaders, men he once called brothers, speak of modernization with the urgency of fire, education reforms, military conscription, a new consulate with Germany. The whispers grow louder. The samurai class must go. Saigō is asked to serve in the new government. He accepts, but his steps are heavy. The meetings feel colder now. Strategy replaces philosophy. Profit speaks louder than virtue. And the boy emperor, still present, still watching, is carried along like a leaf in a stream, unable to stop its flow. One evening, as Saigō prepares to leave Kyoto for Satsuma, the emperor summons him. The chamber is dim. Only one lantern burns. The boy says little. He only bows slowly as Saigō steps forward. They look at each other for a long time. Then, the boy speaks, barely above a whisper. Will the old ways return? And Saigō, standing in the silence of centuries, answers softly. Not as they were, but something of them will remain if we carry them well. They do not speak again. The next morning, Saigō departs, and as the train to Kagoshima hums into motion, Saigō closes his eyes and wonders, what happens when the emperor learns to speak with his own voice? The ink flows slowly tonight. It pools in the curve of each kanji like water gathering. Before a flood, the paper, pale as sea mist, absorbs every stroke with quiet obedience. Saigō Takamori sits alone, knees folded beneath him. The lanterns glow soft against the folds of his robe. Outside, the night is windless, but inside something stirs. Not air, not shadow, but thought. A slow, burning H that refuses to fade. He writes not as a general tonight, but as a man suspended between two worlds. His words move cautiously, as if afraid to name what they already know. To Carino, I hope the rains have spared your crops. We live in interesting times, brother, and I fear we are asked to play roles we did not write. He pauses. His brush hovers. The next sentence does not come easily. The empire he helped shape now seems to drift far from the ideals he once fought for. The boy emperor smiles in portraits and signs edicts with a hand still learning to hold a pen. Around him, men in frock coats, spectacles, polished boots. Ministers who never drew a sword, who measure progress in steam and iron and stock dividends, who call tradition backward, who recite foreign phrases as if they were charms against decay. Saigō sees it all and says little, but silence, too, speaks. He folds the letter with care, no seal, no urgency. Just the weight of feeling wrapped in washy paper, waiting to be understood. This is how he writes now, like a man speaking to ghosts. Carefully, tenderly, as if language itself might fracture under too much truth. At dawn, the letter is gone, dispatched through loyal hands that still move through the shifting alleys of the old capital. Men who bow low but ask no questions. The next night brings another letter, this time to Okubo, Toshi, Michi. You were always the wiser of us to Shimichi. I still remember the field where we buried our first dead. How you folded your hands, not in prayer, but in promise. Do you remember the promise? A cicada stirs in the stillness. The brush dips again. You believe we must move forward. That loyalty must yield to logic. But I wonder if a tree forgets its roots, can it truly grow? Here, the paper buckles slightly under the ink, as if straining to hold what even Saigō cannot say aloud. For weeks now, his thoughts have taken this shape. Questions hidden in metaphor, hopes pressed between lines. Letters as soft weapons wielded not to conquer, but to mourn. He walks the beaches near Kagoshima in the early mornings, sand cool beneath his feet. The sea holds no judgment, only memory. These shores once echoed with cannon fire, with the rush of boots and the cry of freedom. Now they echo only with birdsong and the distant hum of steamships. The new arteries of the empire. Children play where men once died, and in that innocence, Saigō feels a strange ache. Not sadness, exactly, something quieter. Something closer to farewell. He does not speak of rebellion. Not yet, but his dogs grow restless in the courtyard, sensing something he cannot voice. His students, the young swordsman from Satsuma, notice his silences stretching longer, his gaze lingering farther. And still he writes. One night he writes not to a friend, but to no one. If the path of honor and the path of obedience are no longer the same, which road shall a man walk with clean hands? He does not sign this one. He folds it, burns it, watches the flame consume what he himself is not yet ready to hold. The fire crackles softly, a sound like memory unraveling. The days grow warmer. The letters continue, each one a soft defiance. Not of the emperor himself, but of the world being built around him. A world of uniforms and railway schedules, of imported words and severed lineages. A world in which Saigō, once a cornerstone, now feels like an artifact. He returns one evening to find a letter waiting for him. It bears no name, only a mark he recognizes. Okubo's seal. He reads it slowly. Old friend, we must not allow the past to become our master. The emperor is the future. I ask you to trust that this path, though steep, is true. Saigō stares at the page until the words blur. He does not answer. Not yet. Instead, he steps outside, breathes the wind off the mountains, and closes his eyes. Somewhere deep within, something fractures quietly. It is not rage, not even sorrow. It is the sound of distance. Between old friends, old ideals, old Japan, a distance not measured in miles, but in meaning. He lights his lamp again and writes. The brush moves slower now, as if unsure of the language it still remembers. And far away, in a capital of glass and steel, the child emperor sleeps beneath painted dragons, while Saigō dreams of roads that no longer lead home. Next comes the parting, but first the silence before the storm. The fox appears in dreams first. It pads silently through the imperial gardens, where chrysanthemums bloom in orderly rows, yellow, white, soft as breath. The creature does not belong there. Not truly. Its eyes glint with knowing, with something old and untamed. Saigō watches it from the covered walkway, arms folded inside his sleeves. The animal moves with purpose, weaving between stone lanterns and sandalwood benches, brushing past the hem of old customs. It does not speak, but it undoes things, just like the real men now walking through the capital. They come in foreign boots with foreign collars. Advisors from England, Prussia, France. Some speak Japanese, most do not, but they carry maps, rifles, legal codes. They speak of treaties and trade routes, of steam engines and factories, of currency and clocks. The old world, they say, must be made new. They look to Tokyo with eyes full of charts and power, and the men around them. Kido, Ito, even Okubo, nod with heavy solemnity, forgetting the poems they once recited beneath cherry trees. Saigō does not forget. He remembers when they were brothers. Not by blood, but by vow, young men with torn sandals and fire in their chests. Back then, they whispered of honor and sacrifice, of overthrowing the Tokugawa for a brighter dawn. They drank cheap sake in flickering inns and vowed to give their lives for the emperor. But the boy on the throne has become a symbol, distant and surrounded by foreign scripts. The real power moves elsewhere now, behind lacquered doors and parliamentary proposals, where the voice of the countryside is too quiet to be heard. Saigō is not a man of bureaucracy. He feels it in his bones. That old samurai sensibility shaped by windswept ridges and the smell of horse sweat. Where others draft reforms, he hears the low thunder of discontent gathering in rice fields and mountain passes. Where others see growth, he sees severance. He meets Kido once, in the waning light of spring. They sit beneath a paper lantern, drinking tea. Kido's face is thinner than before, more paper than flesh, more policy than poetry. You still walk the hills with your sword at your hip, Saigō, he says. But we no longer live in a time of blades. And yet, Saigō replies softly, the hills have not changed. Kido says nothing for a long while. The lantern flickers. The shadows between them lengthen. Change must come. Kido whispers finally, or Japan will be carved up like China. Saigō knows this fear. The West moves like a tide, swallowing coastlines. But he also knows something else. A nation cannot be saved by erasing its soul. The fox returns. Not in dream this time, but in metaphor. Saigō uses it often when he writes. He sends letters to the south, to Satsuma. In careful strokes, his brush captures the H of misgiving. He does not call for rebellion, not yet. But his language breathes suspicion. They move fast, he writes. Too fast. Like a clever fox slipping through our gates, tail dipped in oil. He writes to Okubo too, though those letters are shorter. Okubo is busy now, Minister of Finance, hands deep in the machinery of reform. The boy who once rode bareback through Kagoshima now oversees railroads and revenue. His answers are always efficient, always polished. I understand your concern, old friend, Okubo replies in careful script. But the time for feelings has passed. We govern with necessity. Necessity. Saigō sits with that word one evening, alone in his garden. A light rain drips from the plum branches above. He feels the word slide through him like a cold blade. Did the fox tell them this too? That honor must be traded for convenience. That old loyalties must be set aside like cracked armor. He visits the imperial court once more, as a guest. The Meiji emperor, still slight, still watching the world with uncertain eyes, receives him in the great hall. Around them, ministers speak of military academies, foreign advisors, European uniforms for the army. Saigō bows deeply, but his heart does not kneel. He looks at the emperor and wonders, does the boy know what is being done in his name? Outside, the chrysanthemum garden remains, but fewer monks tend it now. The gravel paths are less swept. A new building has begun to rise nearby, made of iron and cement. It smells of change, and still the fox moves. Saigō sees it in every silence, in the way old words are no longer spoken in meetings, in the way maps of Japan now come with foreign labels, in the way his own thoughts turn inward, darkening. He begins to wonder, is loyalty still loyalty if the soul of what you loved no longer remains? Or is it something else now? Something hollow, dressed in imperial colors but filled with the breath of strangers. The letters continue. Saigō's words become slower, weightier, like stones laid carefully across a stream. He does not shout. He reflects. He remembers. And yet his pen draws a line, invisible but deep. By the time summer nears, the chrysanthemum blooms pale and early. The fox, unseen but always present, curls beneath the roots. Saigō no longer speaks of politics openly. He walks his garden, feeds his horses, watches the stars from his veranda. But something within him has shifted. The garden has been trespassed. The empire is no longer a home, but a guest house with foreign furniture. And Saigō, once at its heart, now finds himself at the threshold, watching, listening, waiting. Outside the palace, the whispers begin. Quiet questions passed between soldiers, farmers, and sons. What happens when the old warrior finally speaks not with ink, but fire? The hills of Satsuma breathe with mist. It clings to the stone lanterns, to the moss-wrapped shrines, to the rooftops where cranes sometimes land as if searching for memories. Here, in the old domain where blood once burned with pride, the past does not sleep. It waits. Morning comes slowly in Kagoshima. It rolls across the rice paddies like a scroll unrolling across a low wooden table. And in this hush, the samurai stir, not like warriors, but like ghosts. They rise not for war, not yet, but because their bones remember. They gather in silence. In dojos where floorboards groan with memory, in gardens where plum blossoms fall, one by one, onto the same stones their ancestors once bled on. Their swords, passed down through lines of grief and honor, are polished not for ceremony, but for something harder to name. They call Saigō sensei, now teacher, elder, anchor. But even that name feels strange on the wind, as if the world is already forgetting the language he once carried like a banner. Saigō Takamori, the last great figure of a vanished age, walks among them like a man who has already died once. He smiles when they greet him. He listens when they ask. But when they look to him for direction, he only looks at the sky. Because what guidance can he give them now? How does one prepare boys for a world that honors telegraphs over swords? How does one teach loyalty in a time when loyalty is bought with foreign loans? He hears their questions behind the quiet. Sensei, will there be another war? Sensei, do we still matter? Sensei, what do you dream of when you close your eyes? He does not answer in words. Instead, he walks the stone paths barefoot, feeling the chill of the earth. He visits shrines and feeds the dogs that follow him like shadows. And every so often, he writes, but never sends, letters to those who no longer listen. Back in Tokyo, Ito Haribumi signs treaties in foreign languages and wears Western suits. Okubo Toshimichi, once Saigō's comrade in fire and nationhood, now rides in carriages drawn by Western horses, pushing policies Saigō cannot understand. The government once born of rebellion now forgets rebellion's face. Modernization is a fast tide, and Satsuma stands like a rock in the shallows, unbending, unmoved, and slowly drowning. The young men in the academy polish their blades with reverence. They train like it means something. Their fathers were warriors, their grandfathers rebels. They know no other rhythm but steel and loyalty. They do not yet understand the silence that follows modern wars. That victory now lies in ink and rail lines, that their enemies live in boardrooms, not battlefields. Still, they train. They write poems on scrolls and tuck them into armor. They build their bodies as if flesh alone can carry history forward. They dream of battles that sound more like myths than strategy. And behind it all, Saigō watches, with a heart too full for anger and too tired for hope. He walks to the sea some mornings. The waters are still. He thinks of the past, but not with bitterness. He remembers, not the war, but the fire in men's eyes, when they believed they were building something greater than themselves. That fire is gone now, replaced with electric lights and factories. He remembers the Meiji Emperor as a boy. Shy, uncertain. They had sworn to serve him, and in those early days, that promise had meant something pure. But purity has no place in politics, and brotherhood cannot survive the weight of power. Back in Tokyo, officials whisper of Saigō. They wonder if he is plotting, if he stirs rebellion. if he means to resurrect the samurai like ghosts rising from the tomb. But Saigō does not stir rebellion, he sits with it. He listens to it grow like moss between stones. Quiet, patient, inevitable, the men around him want action. But Saigō knows revolutions are not built in a day. They unfold in the silence between dreams and waking. In the evenings, lanterns flicker in the academy. Young voices chant old phrases: loyalty, courage, death before dishonor, and Saigō watches them, not with pride but with sorrow. They are sleepwalking, all of them, caught between errors. Not quite men of the past, not yet men of the future. Warriors with no war, children raised on echoes. In the quiet of night, the wind moves through the pines like the breath of forgotten gods. And Saigō asks the question he cannot answer. What do you do when your country no longer knows your name? In the north, the trains hum louder. In the heart of the empire, a new machine is being built. One that needs no swords, no poets, no Saigō. But the spirit of the old ways lingers, just long enough to wonder. When memory becomes burden, what happens to those who still remember? There is a quiet sadness in the sound of hammers. In what was once the cradle of old beliefs, smokestacks now bloom where trees once whispered. The gardens of Kyoto and Kagoshima, once home to quiet koi and prayerful stillness, now echo with the hiss of steam, the clang of iron, the whir of imported machines. A new language fills the air, not one of poetry, but of productivity. Japan is no longer dreaming beneath cherry blossoms. It is waking violently to the cold steel world. The Meiji Restoration promised a bridge, a passage from the past into the future. But bridges are not always gentle. Sometimes they are built from the ruins of what came before. In Tokyo, the government grows bold. New ministries sprout from the minds of Western, trained men. Telegraph wires string across the land like veins on a foreign body. And railroads cut through sacred hills, splitting the soil where ancestors once slept undisturbed. The samurai watch it all from the shadows. Their swords, once extensions of their spirit, now rest on walls like relics. Their titles have been stripped, their stipends erased by ink on paper. In schools, boys learn arithmetic and English. In factories, men wear uniforms stitched in Osaka cotton. The old ways grow fainter, like a dream dissolving in morning light. And yet, in many hearts, the Bushido flame still flickers. There are those who cannot forget, who will not forget. In Kagoshima, some still wear their hair in the top knot, though the law forbids it. In their homes, calligraphy scrolls still hang beside black powder rifles. Children are taught the stories of Minamoto and Takeda, not of steamships and foreign treaties. A strange contradiction blooms, a garden where tradition and modernity twist around each other like tangled vines. Some see harmony, others see a battlefield. In this garden of change, the samurai grow restless. Saigō Takamori, once the hero of the emperor's return, now leaves like a mountain monk. His silence is louder than a shout. He watches the bloom of the modern world with deep, unmoving eyes, as if reading a poem whose ending he already knows. They call him sensei, and come to him with questions. Is this progress or betrayal? Should we bend or resist? He does not answer easily. He walks in the early mornings, his footsteps soft on the dew-soaked paths of Kagoshima. He listens to the wind, to the rustle of bamboo, to the far-off clang of rifles being tested in secret. In his presence, men feel as if they are standing beside something ancient and sacred, like a shrine half swallowed by vines. But outside Kagoshima, the pace of change quickens. In Osaka, new weapons are forged. Muskets, cannons, bayonets. The army is no longer made of warriors sworn to their clans, but of conscripts drilled in Western formations. Their loyalty is to a government, not a lord. Their strength lies not in courage, but in coordination. The emperor's army reborn in steel. Meanwhile, the old swords, curved and graceful, hang quietly in their scabbards. They gleam still, but not with promise, with memory. What becomes of a warrior when war changes shape? The samurai know how to fight, but not like this. Not against bullets that do not recognize honor. Not in fields where the gods have long since left. Not in a world where a man's worth is measured in coins and contracts, not in blood and vows. The garden turns to ash, petal by petal. There are whispers of rebellion, but they are carried carefully. The government is watching. Letters are intercepted. Spies move through the streets like ghosts. In Satsuma, some train by moonlight, their blades catching the silver glow as if drinking it in for the last time. They do not speak of war. They speak of restoration, not of the emperor, but of their dignity. The air grows thick. In every village you can feel it, that hush before a storm, the silence of something old remembering itself. The land knows. The trees remember, and the blood that flows in the sons of samurai still runs hot with ancient vows. A gun may be quicker than a sword, but it does not carry the soul. And yet, the soul is tired of waiting. Soon, the silence will shatter. But before it does, there is one last tea ceremony, one last breath beneath the cherry trees, before rebellion rises like smoke from an ancient fire, and in the fire's light, we will meet the final image of the last samurai. The rain falls gently on Kagoshima. It has rained for 3 days, as if the sky itself knows something is unraveling. The streets are slick with memory, and the mountains beyond the city wear a veil of mist like a mourner's shawl. In the garden behind Saigō Takamori's home, leaves drip quietly one by one, like ink falling from a brush. He stands at the edge of his veranda, watching them, still as a stone, breathing like a mountain does, slowly, deeply, without urgency. In his hand is a letter, not handwritten, not personal. It is official, stamped with the seal of the new Japan, a decree. Universal conscription begins next month. The samurai class is hereby abolished. No signature at the bottom, but the hand behind the ink is clear. Okubo Toshimichi, once his comrade, now the hand that draws a line across the old world. Not a sword-swinging enemy, not a rebel or invader. Just an old friend in a clean uniform with steady hands, and a pen sharp enough to wound a lifetime. Saigō folds the decree once, then twice, then lays it on the lacquered table as if laying a body to rest. He does not speak. The silence around him is thick with thoughts that do not yet have words. There is no one to fight, and yet it feels like a battle has already been lost. In Tokyo, the reforms continue like clockwork. Trains chug through the valleys. Telegraph wires hum across the hills. The emperor, a boy grown tall, wears a western suit. Streets are widened. Foreigners walk the capital with umbrellas and ambitions. The old shrines are quieter now. The smiths no longer forge katana. The Academy of War teaches artillery drills, not sword forms. The samurai, once the pulse of the nation, are reduced to either civil servants or relics. Their stipends are cut, their roles erased, their honor archived. And in this world of rails and rifles, the code of Bushido becomes something like an heirloom. Precious, but untouched. A lacquered scabbard with no blade inside. Okubo, the architect of these reforms, walks the marble corridors of government with crisp shoes. His words are logic, his vision progress, but deep inside, perhaps something aches. They say he keeps no sword at home now, only books. And shadows. He does not visit Saigō, not anymore. In Satsuma, whispers travel faster than messengers. They say Saigō is being watched, that the government fears him, or perhaps fears the ghost of what he represents. He teaches now, not war, but writing, not orders, but stories. Yet the boys who gather beneath his voice carry fire in their chests. They do not want a bureaucrat's life. They want purpose, something older, something lost. And so the question spreads like wind over dry grass. What will Sensei do? But Saigō gives no answer. He only walks the garden path, feeds his dogs, sips tea that cools too quickly. The ink of the decree is long dry now, but its wound still bleeds beneath his ribs. He remembers Okubo in younger days, laughing beneath a cherry tree, sleeves rolled, a scroll of plans in his hand. They had dreamed of a stronger Japan, one that could stand beside the great powers without bowing, one that would not be carved like a melon by Western hands. But dreams are not blueprints, and visions are not always shared. Okubo's dream is of machinery and markets. Saigō's dream is of spirit, of loyalty, of old stone and quiet forests, of sacrifice and simplicity. Their paths, once parallel, now bend away like the branches of a broken tree. Still, he does not curse his old friend. He only wonders, did we know, back then, what we would have to burn to build this future? In the distance, the sea murmurs. Fishermen haul their nets. Old women sweep temple courtyards. Children run with wooden swords, shouting the names of heroes they never met. But change is the only hero now. And in the capital, new edicts are drawn, paper after paper, reform after reform, each one a quiet blow, each one an echo of a sword not swung, and yet felt. The samurai are not defeated in battle. They are rewritten. One evening, Saigō lights a lantern. Its glow flickers across the tatami, catching the edges of old calligraphy scrolls and dust-covered armor. He sits beside it, not as a general, but as a man who loved his country too deeply to change with it. He takes up a brush, not to protest, not to plot, just to write something down before the light fades. A thought, perhaps, or a farewell. When the soul of a people is taken from them quietly, even their silence becomes sacred. He sets the brush down. The rain has stopped, but the air still smells of endings. And somewhere, in a government office far away, another decree is prepared. This one colder, more final. But before the sword returns to history's stage, it begins as paper and ink, and the next chapter will ask, what does a soul do when it is outlawed? The mountains breathe cold and still under a rising moon. Somewhere among the pines and shadows of Kyushu, men gather in silence, not to conquer, not to chant, but to remember who they were. A flicker of firelight plays on lacquered armor long out of style. The swords they polish are ceremonial now, but their hearts beat with something ancient, something trembling. A memory passed down like a prayer. Saigō Takamori sits apart, as he often does these days. He is older now, the roundness in his face softened by sorrow, the heaviness in his frame more burden than strength. His hands, once steady with calligraphy and command, now rest quietly on his knees. But his gaze is sharp, not angry, not proud, just clear. The wind moves through the trees, rustling like fabric, like the flutter of banners from another time. They call it the Satsuma Rebellion, but Saigō calls it something else. He does not believe in rebellions. He believes in duty, in rectitude, in a world where honor stands taller than law. Yet the world has changed its language. It no longer speaks in the tone of sword steel or bowed heads. It speaks in factory smoke and foreign suits, in the voice of banks and rifles. He remembers when the Meiji Restoration was still young, when hope bloomed like spring across a shattered country, when he and Okubo had dreams bigger than blood. But now, that same restoration marches past him, uniforms starched, laws cold, eyes forward, and it does not look back. The ink has dried on decrees that outlaw the samurai. Their stipends are gone, their swords banned, their children sent to schools that teach a new kind of pride, modern, mechanized, empty of ancestry. And so Saigō does what the old stories say a man must do. He walks away from the capital. He returns to the soil that bore him, to Satsuma, to the hills, where boys still train in secret with bamboo spears, where elders still bow before the shrine and not the minister, where the spirit of Bushido is not yet a ghost. They come to him quietly. Former students, soldiers without a master, men who once swore loyalty to a state now too fast, too forgetful. They do not bring speeches. They bring tea and questions. Sensei, they say, if we no longer have a place in this country, where do we go? And Saigō answers not with strategy, but with stillness. A camp is formed near Kagoshima. Fires are lit beneath the same trees that bloom with cherry blossoms each March. The petals that fall like snow over men who do not know if they will see another spring. The rebellion begins, not with drums, but with footfalls on stone. Their weapons are few, their numbers small, but their purpose is steady. They march north, slow as a funeral, aiming for the heart of a nation that no longer recognizes its own pulse. The government responds like clockwork. Conscripts are summoned. Modern rifles readied. Railroads groan with troops. Artillery shells are wheeled in like prophets of a future the rebels never asked for. The battlefield is unequal from the first step. But Saigō does not measure strength by numbers. He does not look to win. He looks to die well. To die with a name that his grandchildren can whisper without shame. In February, the hills around Kumamoto echo with gunfire. It is louder than the temple bells, louder than the soft snow landing on cedar roofs. The Satsuma warriors, many of them just boys with swords too big for their shoulders, charge against modern rifles, not because they believe they will break through, but because there is no other road left to walk. The silence between battles is thick. Many lie awake at night, not speaking. Some cry, some write poems, some polish their blades until dawn. And in the heart of this, Saigō sits beneath a tree writing letters to the emperor. He does not curse him. He still believes in him. But he mourns what has been lost. He writes, "I have no hatred in my heart, but I cannot watch honor become outlawed." The emperor never replies. By autumn, the rebellion is bleeding. Each step forward costs lives they can't replace. Saigō, wounded, walks with difficulty. His beard is grey. His eyes dim only with sorrow, never fear. On the 24th of September 1877, the final charge is made at Shiroyama. There are no reinforcements. No supplies. Just cherry blossom warriors against Gatling guns. They do not turn back. Saigō is hit. They say he falls with grace, resting beneath a tree one last time. Some say he performs seppuku, others that a friend ends it for him swiftly. But the facts no longer matter in full. He is gone. And with him, the last breath of the old soul of Japan. The new dawn rises over Tokyo, reflected in glass and iron. Trains run. Laws tighten. The samurai disappear from the census and textbooks, but not from memory. They remain. In song. In silence, in the way a man might still bow before entering a room without knowing why. The fire is out, but the smoke lingers, curling upward like a prayer. And in its fading scent, a question remains. What happens to a nation that forgets the cost of its own becoming? They walk in silence, save for the murmurs of gravel and the low hush of wind. Over the ridges of Kagoshima, a line of men, some old, some still soft-faced, trails like smoke through the folds of the southern mountains. Their armor is patchwork, a blend of old and new, lacquered plates worn over cotton tunics, rifles slung beside blades. The sun rises behind them, a quiet witness to each step. There are no banners, no parades. Just calloused feet and the occasional rustle of a prayer murmured into the chill morning air. Even the crows do not cry today. They perch on trees in stillness, their black feathers like funeral veils. Saigō Takamori walks at the front, as always. His presence alone is steadying, not in grandeur, but in gravity. He carries no flag, no badge of command, only a quiet gaze and the dignity of a man who walks for something that cannot be undone. His robes are worn. His katana rests against his hip like a shadow that never left him. His thoughts are his own, but each man behind him senses their weight, as if the air thickens when he exhales. They pass fields where rice ripples in the breeze, the last harvests of summer bowing low under the sky. Farmers pause their labour and kneel without a word, offering what little they have. Bowls of millet, dried fish, silent gestures of reverence, not for the cause, perhaps, but for the man, for the memory of the old order he once protected. Children peer from the thresholds of homes tucked into hillsides. Some wave, others simply watch, their eyes wide and uncertain. These are not the marches their fathers spoke of. There are no horns, no songs, just the soft rhythm of souls over earth and the hush of something ancient coming to an end. Every footfall feels like an echo, not of what lies ahead, but of what is vanishing behind them. At night, they light small fires. Not enough to be seen from a distance, only enough to warm their hands and boil a little tea. The stars overhead seem strangely bright, as if the heavens lean closer to hear the final verses of a fading story. Some of the younger soldiers whisper of dreams, of Tokyo burning, of a righteous victory, of restoring what was lost. But even they speak softly now, as if the hills themselves might disagree. The older samurai do not interrupt, but their silence holds the weight of truth. This march is not a crusade. It is a farewell. Many of these men once wore the chrysanthemum crest. They fought to defend the emperor, not to defy him. But something in the world shifted beneath their feet. The court they served moved far beyond the hills of Satsuma into railways and telegrams, into Western suits and budget meetings, into a future where the sword is no longer sacred and loyalty must be signed in ink. Still they walk, northward toward Kumamoto, toward the fortress walls where the imperial army waits with cannons and carbines and conscripts, trained not in loyalty, but in drills and doctrine, toward battle not for victory, but for memory. One man recites poetry as they pass a grove of camphor trees, a verse from a long dead courtier, about falling leaves and the briefness of life. No one speaks afterward. The rustle of those same leaves in the wind answers well enough. Their rations grow thinner, rice stretched with barley, soup made of water and wild greens. But they endure, not with the strength of the body, but of the soul. The stubborn ember of belief that some things, once pledged, must not be betrayed. Some weep at night, quietly with their backs turned to the fire, not from fear, but from the ache of watching their world dissolve, piece by piece, like old ink in rain. Others sharpen blades that may never be drawn again. Rituals of the hand that keep the heart from breaking. And still they walk, through valleys that once echoed with festival drums, past temples now empty, beneath skies that remember the smoke of earlier wars. Step by step, they become not soldiers, but memories in motion, living relics of a time the empire no longer needs. They do not speak of retreat, they do not beg for peace. They carry what cannot be restored. Dignity, sorrow, a kind of love too loyal to bend. And as they walk, the land seems to lean in closer, as if it, too, knows the steps by heart. There is no music in this march, only breath and silence. and the steady beat of hearts too proud to surrender. Tomorrow the cannons will fire, but tonight they walk beneath the stars, toward a memory, toward a mountain, toward the whisper of the last stand. The rains arrive first, not with fury, but with insistence. Gentle at first, then steady, then relentless. The kind of rain that soaks through straw sandals and clings to the sleeves of tattered uniforms. Above the plains of Kumamoto, dark clouds settle like omens, and the sound of distant gunfire begins to echo through the hills. The siege has begun. Kumamoto Castle, once a seat of feudal pride, now stands as a fortress of the new order. Imperial troops within its black, tiled walls, armed with rifles and reinforced by supplies ferried in by the reach of the railroad. It is modernity with teeth. The rebels, by contrast, carry muskets, swords, and the memory of an older Japan. Saigō Takamori stands still in the rain. His robes are soaked, but he does not move to shelter. He watches the castle like a man staring into a grave, not with fear, but with solemn recognition. This is not a siege. This is a reckoning. His men, farmers, students, former samurai, huddle in the muddy trenches they've carved around the stone bastion. Their uniforms are mismatched, their provisions thin. And yet, there is something unshaken in their eyes, a stillness that does not waver even as bullets tear through trees, through tents, through flesh. Kumamoto does not open its gates. Inside the castle, the imperial garrison refuses surrender. They have provisions enough to wait out weeks, perhaps months. Reinforcements are coming. Modern troops with modern guns. Trained not in the old Bushido ways, but in the relentless logic of military academies. The men within the castle understand that this is not just a battle for land. It is a battle for the future of Japan. Outside, the rebels know it too. They know the rain will not stop. That each drop falling from the sky is another heartbeat counted. Another inch of damp spreading into their blankets, their boots, their rice stores. Still they remain. A soldier carves poetry into the butt of his rifle. Another hums a lullaby his mother once sang. Somewhere, tea is boiled over a fire that barely catches beneath the rain. These small human rituals, so soft and pointless against the violence of history, are what keep the rebellion alive. Days pass. The field becomes a swamp of smoke and blood. Supplies dwindle. Hunger grows teeth. Some begin to whisper doubts, but no one voices them aloud in Saigō's presence. His silence is stronger than any speech. His calm steadies even the most frayed nerves. He walks among the wounded, bows to the dead, offers quiet prayers no louder than breath. He does not beg the heavens to intervene. He does not curse the castle walls. He accepts what is unfolding, not as fate, but as consequence. In truth, this siege was never meant to win a war. It was meant to wake a memory, to ask Japan if it remembered what it once was, and what it might still be. But the nation has already chosen steamships and telegraphs, chosen factories and uniforms, chosen progress over poetry. And so the rain keeps falling, the rebels dig deeper, not into the soil, but into themselves, into resolve, into sorrow. into something older than fear. They hold the lines not with strength, but with stubborn love. For a code, for a land, for a leader who does not command from behind but walks beside them. A skirmish erupts at dawn. The thunder of cannons tears through the morning mist. Screams rise, then vanish in the echo. By noon, the field is quieter but redder. Saigō kneels beside a fallen youth, barely 16, and closes his eyes with fingers that do not shake. He says nothing. The rain has washed away the blood from the boy's face, but not from the earth. Even now, Saigō refuses to attack in fury. His orders remain clear: no pillaging, no cruelty, fight with dignity, die with honor. Even in this, perhaps especially in this, there must be restraint. But outside the circle of rebel command, the world is moving quickly. The emperor, still young, still shaped by the hands around him, signs decrees without understanding the blood they spill. Railways carry more troops toward Kumamoto. Rifles arrive in crates smelling of oil and empire. The rebellion is being outpaced, outnumbered, out-engineered, and still the rebels stay. There is something heartbreaking in their perseverance. Not naive, not foolish, but deliberate. They know the castle will not fall. They know the mountain winds carry rumors of defeat. Yet they remain as if standing in the last pages of a fading book, unwilling to close the cover just yet. Each day is a litany of choices: to hold, to bury, to hope. Each night, Saigō sits beneath the same tree, watching the castle lights flicker in the distance. He holds a map on his lap, but he does not study it. The path is already known. What remains is not strategy, but endurance. One final cannon shot cracks the sky. One more brother falls into the mud. And then the rain, as if in mourning, begins again. There is no victory here, only memory carried in damp footsteps and calloused hands. The siege will lift. The march will continue. But something has already ended beneath the walls of Kumamoto. Something older than rebellion. A thread once golden, now frayed. Saigō rises, water dripping from his sleeves, and turns from the castle. He does not look back. The castle behind him stands untouched. But something within him breaks like a string pulled too tight. And so the rebels move on, not toward triumph, but toward the silence that follows it. A candle burns low in the corner of a canvas tent. Outside, the wind hums over the hills of Shiroyama, rustling dry grass and scattering ash from dying fires. Inside, Saigō Takamori sits alone, his shoulders slightly stooped, his hand hovering above paper. The ink brush does not move. It waits, like the man holding it, caught in the long pause between breath and memory. He begins slowly. Each stroke of the brush is deliberate, drawn from somewhere deeper than thought. From loyalty, from sorrow, from the weight of an age that no longer exists. The letter is not political. It is not a demand, nor a negotiation. It is something gentler, a whisper, a farewell. He writes to the emperor not as a rebel, not even as a soldier, but as a servant. And in every curve of every character, there is a quiet grief. Not anger, not resentment. Only the ache of one who has given all and who now prepares to vanish into the mist without complaint. Outside the tent, the sound of rain begins. Soft, steady, like an old lullaby. The men do not sleep. They sit beneath trees or crouch beneath rocks, polishing their swords, not to use them again, but to honor the memory of who they were. They speak little, words feel heavy now, too solid for a night made of shadows and silence. Once, long ago, Saigō stood in the imperial court, his robes clean, his eyes bright with the hope of Meiji. He had believed, then, in a Japan that could carry its soul into the modern world, a nation that could wear steel and still remember the scent of plum blossoms. But time has teeth, and ideals are delicate things. Now, he finishes his letter. The ink has begun to fade at the edges, not from time, but from sorrow. He does not seal it. He does not address it. The letter remains on the low writing table like a folded memory. A thought left in twilight. He knows he will not send it. The emperor will never read the words. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps some messages live only in the act of writing, in the quiet surrender of pen to paper, of pride to peace. To write and then choose not to send this, too, is a kind of dignity. All around him, the world grows still. The rain deepens, washing over broken helmets and empty rice bowls. The city lights below, far beyond the hills, shimmer faintly. A Japan reborn, radiant and rising, but built on a foundation that no longer remembers the names of its builders. Saigō closes his eyes. He sees Kagoshima, his home, and the mountains beyond it. He sees his old students, the young men who believed in honor as if it were a star that could never fall. Many of them lie sleeping now beneath the soil, having marched with him out of loyalty, not ambition. He does not cry. That part of him belongs to another time. The letter rests beside a small box of keepsakes, a scrap of a banner, a string of worn prayer beads, and a portrait of the emperor from years ago, when things still felt possible. He places the letter atop the box, not as a statement, but as a sigh. The decision not to send it is not weakness, it is clarity. He has already said all he needed to say in how he lived, in how he led, in how he chose not to flee when he could have disappeared into the mountains like a ghost. Some convictions speak more loudly in silence. Tomorrow will come quickly. Already, the imperial army closes in. They are many, and they are tired of waiting. They will come with rifles and cannon, with discipline and calculation. But Saigō's men, what few remain, will meet them with the quiet courage of those who have nothing left to prove. There is no victory to be found now, but there is still honor in the way one chooses to fall. He stands slowly, feeling the pull in his joints, the fatigue behind his ribs. He picks up the letter one more time, just to hold it. The paper is warm from his touch, soft and fragile, like old skin. He folds it gently and returns it to its place. Outside, a young aide waits. He does not speak as Saigō steps out into the rain. He only bows. Respect does not require ceremony anymore. The night is darker now. But in the dark, some things become clearer. This was never about winning. It was about remembering, about not letting the soul of a people disappear without one final breath. In a world changing too quickly to hold on to its past, Saigō's letter, unsent, unread, becomes a kind of offering, a symbol of quiet resistance. Not to progress, but to forgetting. It is not mailed. It is not copied. It is not quoted in textbooks. But somewhere, perhaps in the hush between cherry blossoms falling, or in the spaces between raindrops on an old battlefield, the spirit of it lingers. Like a final note in a song long faded, it waits. And so the letter lies folded, untouched by hands, yet filled with meaning, a ghost of loyalty unspoken. In the coming dawn, as final choices sharpen, another silence begins to gather. The silence before the last stand. The wind moans through the hills of Tabaru, Zoka, soft as an old lullaby forgotten by time. The rain has not stopped for days, soaking the soil, washing blood into the folds of the earth. Rifles crack in the distance like brittle branches breaking beneath the weight of too many winters. But in this moment, this breath between volleys, all is quiet. A stillness before memory takes root. It is March 1877 and spring should be arriving, but no one notices the buds on the trees or the way the moss glows green on the rocks. The men are cold. Their uniforms are soaked through. The mud pulls at their legs like something alive, eager to keep them here forever. Some have wrapped their feet in straw. Others march barefoot. All carry the ache of something deeper than war, the ache of having believed. Saigō Takamori stands on the slope, not far from the front line, his cloak dark with rain. His face is unreadable, carved like stone that has endured too many winters. His gaze sweeps over the mist and the trees, the shifting shapes of men crouched among rocks and trenches. Somewhere below, the imperial army waits, well-fed, well-armed, and many. Their rifles glint even under a grey sky. Their artillery speaks with the authority of the future. But the rebels do not yield. Not yet. For 3 weeks now, they've clung to this hillside. Tabaru Zuka. A name that sounds like poetry but smells of gunpowder. Each day the Meiji forces climb a little higher, press a little harder. Each day the rebels dig in, refusing to fall back. Some say the mountain drinks more blood than the sea below it. Even the cherry trees, the proud sakura that once watched samurai pass in bloom, now weep early blossoms into mud. There is no glory here, only sorrow. And yet the men stay. They fight not for strategy nor for victory, but for memory. The memory of a Japan that is vanishing like mist. A Japan where duty meant something simple and sacred. Where swords were not just weapons, but promises. Where a man's word could hold the weight of an empire. They fight for Saigō. And Saigō, though he has never asked them to die, cannot ask them to stop. He watches as brothers fall beside brothers, as sons cradle the lifeless bodies of their fathers, as the rain turns red for the 100th time and no one flinches anymore. There is no music to this battle, only the soft that of men collapsing into mud and the wind dragging prayers from dying mouths. Saigō speaks little during these days, but once, alone beneath a half-bloomed tree, he kneels and touches the earth. His hand sinks into the cold soil. He whispers, "Is this what we fought for?" The wind answers, but it sounds like silence. Tabaru Zoka is not a decisive battle. It is a slow unraveling, a sorrow stretched thin across the hills. More than 4,000 fall here. Most will be remembered by no name, only by the way they held a line, or offered the last of their rice to a comrade, or died with their sword still drawn. Later, when spring truly comes, the blossoms will bloom again. But this year they fall too soon, as if the trees themselves are mourning, as if even nature understands that something precious is slipping away. Not just lives, but a way of being, a rhythm of soul that once pulsed through the islands like breath. The Meiji soldiers, too, begin to change. Some are shaken by the bravery of their opponents. Some are haunted by the look in the rebels' eyes. A mixture of sadness and resolve, like monks walking into fire. They were told these men were traitors. But they fight like something sacred. And when they fall, the ground does not seem to mock them. Among the letters that will later be found on bodies, one stands out. It is unsigned, ink blurred by rain. It reads, "We were born to a world of honor, and now die in a world of progress. But we carry no hatred, only remembrance." By the end of March, Tabaru Zoka is lost. The rebels retreat, though retreat is hardly the word. They drift, step by painful step, into the shrinking shadow of their rebellion. Their numbers thin. Their hope flickers. But even now, they carry Saigō's silence like a torch, not blazing, but steady. And Saigō, he says nothing. But sometimes, in the quiet between storms, he looks toward the future as if searching for someone he will never meet. A child, perhaps, walking beneath cherry trees long after the war is over, wondering what it all meant. In the ashes of Tabaru Zoka, even silence feels scorched. But in the quiet that follows, a question lingers. When a dream dies, what remains of the dreamer? Let us follow him now, as the path narrows and dusk deepens. The morning comes grey and hollow. It arrives not with cannon fire or clashing steel, but with silence, a silence heavy as soaked linen, stretched thin between the bamboo forests and the ruined outposts. The smoke has not yet cleared from the hills around Kumamoto, but already something else has clouded the air. Something quieter, colder, suspicion. It is not born of fear, but of familiarity, the sense that someone close has turned slightly, imperceptibly, like a blade turning in one's sleeve. A shift in tone, a delayed arrival, a ration misplaced, a whispered name spoken too quickly. These things, when taken alone, are nothing, but Saigō has lived long enough to feel when the seams of loyalty begin to fray. He does not voice it. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The old codes still bind him. One does not accuse without certainty. One does not name betrayal until it is already done. But his eyes are not silent. He watches the supply wagons that never arrive. He counts the crates of ammunition that vanish in the night. He studies the maps, not the land, but the hands that unfold them. And always, always, there is Shinohara, an officer, a friend, a comrade since the days when their hair was still black with youth and unscarred by war. Shinohara Kunamoto, the man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Saigō in the court of the shogun, the man who rode with him when they still dreamed of restoring dignity to the nation before dreams turned to trenches. It is Shinohara who volunteers for career duty, who knows the schedules of each movement, the coordinates of each ambush. It is Shinohara who returns late, often muddy, always apologetic. But it is also Shinohara who looks away first. On the 29th day of the siege, the imperial army arrives before the rebels are ready. They move with precision, not desperate or reckless, but informed, too informed. They strike at weak points that were unmarked. They bypass traps that were laid just hours before. Inside the command tent, Saigō reads a report smudged with blood and rain. He holds it gently, as one might hold the wing of a dying bird. The enemy knew the ridge was exposed, it says. Their shells landed before our scouts returned. And beneath that, a note from Carino, terse and strange. He did not look surprised. That evening, Saigō does not eat. He sits in the dark, sharpening a blade he may not use, and listens to the storm pass through the valley, like breath through lungs. The men outside speak in lowered voices. Even the wind seems cautious. He thinks of betrayal not as a wound, but as a choice. Not the act of turning against, but the slow erosion of belief. He does not hate Shinohara. That would be easier. He simply mourns him. Mourns the fact that a man once filled with fire has become a ledger. Calculating losses, weighing futures, selling silence for survival. Perhaps he was promised mercy. Perhaps he believed this would end the bloodshed sooner. Perhaps he no longer believes in anything at all. Betrayal is not always born in shadow. Sometimes it grows in daylight, watered by reason, pruned by necessity. Sometimes it looks like a man trying to save the country from itself. Shinohara dies 2 days later, not in combat but by his own hand. The letter he leaves is brief. Saigō reads it beneath the light of a flickering lantern. Forgive me, Saigō Dono. I thought I was saving lives. I did not know how to carry both sword and sorrow. I pray there is still honor somewhere in this ruin. I did not know how to stop the dying. Saigō does not cry. The eyes of samurai have long learned to weep in silence. But he folds the letter carefully and places it beneath a rock, near the roots of a cherry tree that has not yet bloomed. He says nothing to the others. The name is never spoken. The past is never explained. But from that day on, Saigō begins to walk a little more slowly. He begins to stare longer at the hills before each march. And in his voice, something hollow begins to ring. Not cowardice, but clarity. The clarity of a man who understands how revolutions rot from within. The final defeat will not come from a rifle or a blade. It will come from within the heart, from the moment you realize that you are no longer marching toward a dream, but away from it. In the end, Saigō still believes in something, but belief is no longer enough to keep the rain from falling, no longer enough to keep the flag clean, and so the wind lifts it, torn at the edge, smudged with mud, and carries it quietly like a secret too heavy to tell. The sword can pierce flesh, but it is the unseen fracture, the silent betrayal that unravels a cause. And yet, even broken banners can still cast long shadows, especially when the sun begins to fall. The morning comes grey and hollow. It arrives not with cannon fire or clashing steel, but with silence, a silence heavy as soaked linen, stretched thin between the bamboo forests and the ruined outposts. The smoke has not yet cleared from the hills around Kumamoto, but already something else has clouded the air. Something quieter, colder, suspicion. It is not born of fear, but of familiarity, the sense that someone close has turned slightly, imperceptibly, like a blade turning in one's sleeve. A shift in tone, a delayed arrival, a ration misplaced, a whispered name spoken too quickly. These things, when taken alone, are nothing, but Saigō has lived long enough to feel when the seams of loyalty begin to fray. He does not voice it. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The old codes still bind him. One does not accuse without certainty. One does not name betrayal until it is already done. But his eyes are not silent. He watches the supply wagons that never arrive. He counts the crates of ammunition that vanish in the night. He studies the maps, not the land, but the hands that unfold them. And always, always, there is Shinohara, an officer, a friend, a comrade since the days when their hair was still black with youth and unscarred by war. Shinohara Kunamoto, the man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Saigō in the court of the shogun. The man who rode with him when they still dreamed of restoring dignity to the nation, before dreams turned to trenches. It is Shinohara who volunteers for career duty, who knows the schedules of each movement, the coordinates of each ambush. It is Shinohara who returns late, often muddy, always apologetic. But it is also Shinohara who looks away first. On the 29th day of the siege, the imperial army arrives before the rebels are ready. They move with precision, not desperate or reckless, but informed, too informed. They strike at weak points that were unmarked. They bypass traps that were laid just hours before. Inside the command tent, Saigō reads a report smudged with blood and rain. He holds it gently, as one might hold the wing of a dying bird. The enemy knew the ridge was exposed, it says. Their shells landed before our scouts returned. And beneath that, a note from Carino, terse and strange. He did not look surprised. That evening, Saigō does not eat. He sits in the dark, sharpening a blade he may not use, and listens to the storm pass through the valley, like breath through lungs. The men outside speak in lowered voices. Even the wind seems cautious. He thinks of betrayal not as a wound, but as a choice. Not the act of turning against, but the slow erosion of belief. He does not hate Shinohara. That would be easier. He simply mourns him. Mourns the fact that a man once filled with fire has become a ledger. Calculating losses, weighing futures, selling silence for survival. Perhaps he was promised mercy. Perhaps he believed this would end the bloodshed sooner. Perhaps he no longer believes in anything at all. Betrayal is not always born in shadow. Sometimes it grows in daylight, watered by reason, pruned by necessity. Sometimes it looks like a man trying to save the country from itself. Shinohara dies 2 days later, not in combat but by his own hand. The letter he leaves is brief. Saigō reads it beneath the light of a flickering lantern. "Forgive me, Saigō Dono. I thought I was saving lives. I did not know how to carry both sword and sorrow. I pray there is still honor somewhere in this ruin. I did not know how to stop the dying." Saigō does not cry. The eyes of samurai have long learned to weep in silence. But he folds the letter carefully and places it beneath a rock, near the roots of a cherry tree that has not yet bloomed. He says nothing to the others. The name is never spoken. The past is never explained. But from that day on, Saigō begins to walk a little more slowly. He begins to stare longer at the hills before each march. And in his voice, something hollow begins to ring. Not cowardice, but clarity. The clarity of a man who understands how revolutions rot from within. The final defeat will not come from a rifle or a blade. It will come from within the heart, from the moment you realize that you are no longer marching toward a dream, but away from it. In the end, Saigō still believes in something, but belief is no longer enough to keep the rain from falling, no longer enough to keep the flag clean, and so the wind lifts it, torn at the edge, smudged with mud, and carries it quietly like a secret too heavy to tell. The sword can pierce flesh, but it is the unseen fracture, the silent betrayal that unravels a cause. And yet, even broken banners can still cast long shadows, especially when the sun begins to fall. The morning of September 24, 1877, arrives in a hush like a breath held too long. Mist clings low over the ridges of Shiro Yoma, veiling the trees, wrapping the crags in ghost light. Beneath this hush, beneath this veil, history waits, not grand, not triumphant, but small and grave and still, a final breath held in the lungs of the old world. Saigō Takamori stands where mountain meets sky. His body, weary, aches with the weight of a lifetime, of loyalty, of loss, of questions never fully answered. Around him are the last of the samurai, fewer than 400 now. Men whose names will not be remembered, but whose silence lingers like incense smoke. Their uniforms are torn, their swords dull, but their eyes still burn. Below them, the imperial army closes in, 30,000 men. Their cannons are already positioned, their rifles polished in the early light. There is no doubt of the outcome, but Saigō is calm. He has always been calm at the edge of endings. He adjusts his belt quietly. The steel at his hip has walked beside him through rebellion and reform in the halls of Edo and the fields of Tabaru Zoka. It has seen friends buried and futures fray. But today, it too will find rest. It is said he hums a poem under his breath. Something about cherry blossoms. Something about honor. Though no one can recall the exact words, poems often die before the men who whisper them. The battle begins before the sun clears the mist. Gunfire cracks across the slopes like the sky breaking open. Smoke coils upward, a grey spiral toward heaven. The air is filled with shouting, screaming, and the haunting sound of flutes. The Satsuma signal songs, brave even in retreat, men fall quickly. Saigō fights for a time, his sword rising and falling like a bow pulled across old strings. But his leg is struck. A bullet finds flesh, and he stumbles, blood soaking the stones. He is carried back, propped gently against a tree. A friend kneels beside him, a loyal retainer whose name has blurred with the years. The mountain is quiet again. In the distance, the cries of battle continue. But here, around Saigō, there is only breath and a decision: to be taken alive, to be paraded as a relic, a curiosity, a lesson, is not the end he chooses. He asks for the sword. His friend understands. No words are needed. This is a language older than governments, older than victory. It is the language of honor, of final grace. There are two versions of how it ends. In one, Saigō takes the blade himself, steady even in pain, and makes the cut that history cannot forget. In the other, his friend performs the deed, tears blurring his vision as the steel meets flesh. Both stories carry the same silence afterward, a silence that feels like falling snow. When the imperial soldiers reach his body, they find him slumped gently, as if asleep. His face is serene. His hands rest in his lap. There is no rage, no bloodlust. Just a man who chose how his name would close. No official photograph is taken. No triumphant declaration is made over the corpse. In fact, for days, there is confusion. No one can say for sure that it is him. Rumors spread. Some say he escaped, fled to China or Russia. Some say he waits in the mountains, waiting for a more just age. Even now, there are whispers. But time does what it always does. It carries the body away. It carries the sword down into the soil. The final act is not a shout, but a burial, quiet, slow, unremarked. Years later, school children in Kagoshima will be taught his name. They will bow before statues. They will read poems that try to capture a spirit already fading into legend. And some, walking the same trails beneath Shiroyama, will say they feel something there. Not a ghost, not a hero, but a presence, a question. What does it mean to be loyal to something that changes? What does it mean to die for a world already gone? Somewhere, a cherry tree blooms too early, and petals fall like soft confetti over old stone. The mountain is quiet. The earth has accepted its sword, but memory, like water, seeks the low places, and even fallen empires cast long reflections. And so we turn to Tokyo, to suits and spectacles, to the architects of the new age, and ask, what was built from the bones of the old? In the quiet aftermath of battle, long after the rifle smoke has lifted and the mountain winds have carried away the scent of blood, there lies a silence more stubborn than death, the silence of memory refusing to vanish. Saigō Takamori is gone, or so the new government insists. His name is stricken from the records. His portrait removed from the walls. The samurai who once stood beside emperors and argued with ministers now lies beneath the earth. And Tokyo exhales in relief. The last of the old guard has fallen. But beneath that official silence, something else begins to stir. In Kagoshima, his hometown, there is no shame in speaking his name. Farmers pause by his statue, which the government pretends does not exist. Children play near shrines where his spirit is quietly honored, not with loud declarations, but with incense, folded paper cranes, and the reverence only the forgotten are afforded. They call him Nanshu-o, the great teacher of the South. The Meiji government, still learning how to wield the fragile tools of modernity, cannot quite make sense of him. How do you explain a man who helped birth the new world only to die resisting it? How do you file that under loyalty or treason? The bureaucracy leans on the word rebel, but the ink never dries, because memory is not managed by decree. It grows in cracks, in the margins of history books, in the whispered stories passed down at night. Memory refuses to obey. There is a school teacher in Satsuma who tells his students about a man who once walked barefoot among his people, who wept for the poor and questioned the powerful. He leaves Saigō's name out, but the children know. There is an old woman who carries a folded letter, yellow with age. A thank you note signed in brushstroke. Takamori. She never shows it, but touches it on stormy nights. Years pass. Japan industrializes. Rails stretch across valleys. Smoke stacks rise. The emperor rides trains. Western suits replace kimonos in the government hallways. But still, in the southern prefectures, people bow toward the mountain. Shiroyama becomes a place of pilgrimage, and then, quietly, something shifts. A young Meiji emperor, once shielded from the truth of the rebellion, begins to ask questions. He is older now, and the victories of modernity taste strangely bitter. Factories flourish, but farmers starve. The emperor, curious and conflicted, orders a review of the past. One by one, the pages of the rebellion are reopened. And in the light of time, Saigō's image begins to soften, not erased, but reframed, not condemned, but considered. In 1889, the government does something unexpected. It grants Saigō a full pardon, posthumous, quiet, but it sends a ripple through the country. It is not an apology, not exactly, more like a sigh, a recognition that the man they buried had roots they could not reach. 2 years later, a statue is raised in Ueno Park in the heart of Tokyo. There, among plum blossoms and strolling couples, stands Saigō again. Not in battle armor, not on horseback, but in simple clothes. A dog by his side, a walking stick in hand, a man at peace. It is a strange thing. A government commissioning the likeness of its most famous rebel. But perhaps it is not rebellion they remember. Perhaps it is conviction, because history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is whispered by those who simply refused to vanish. And even now, in modern Japan, Saigō's legacy lingers like an old song, too honest to forget, too complex to simplify. He lives in film, in literature, in the silent nods of tour guides near the remnants of old forts. His statue still stands in Ueno, though few know the full story. Children pose beside it, unaware of the blood that shaped the smile carved in bronze. In Kagoshima, his memory is not just honored, it is lived. His teachings echo in ethics classes. His letters are studied for their humility. His fall is taught not as failure, but as a paradox. The man who helped build an empire by dying outside its gates. Some say the sword that ends him is mercy. Others say it is closure. But what remains is not the blade, it is the story, and perhaps that is the truest measure of a life. Not whether you won, or ruled, or survived, but whether they remembered you when the dust settled, whether your name was carried by those with nothing left to gain by saying it. In the shadow of Shiroyama, where wildflowers now sway in the grass, and wind writes its own scripture, Saigō leaves still, not in defiance, but in echo, because some spirits are too vast for exile, some names too rooted for erasure, and in that lingering presence, in the space where memory resists silence, we glimpse a new kind of power, not the sword, but the story. And now the story moves onward to the empire itself, and the slow unraveling that even the victors could not prevent. The wind moves through the bamboo groves of southern Kyushu like breath through a flute. Long, hollow, ancient. It whispers stories not taught in schools, stories held between root and leaf, in the hush between memory and myth. A rustle of green, a bend of cane, and the past stirs quietly among the living. In the soft shade beneath those tall, swaying stalks, old men stretch their limbs at dawn. Their hair is silver now, tied back like in the days of war. Their robes are worn, their movements slower, but something precise remains, a blade drawn in silence, a bow held in stillness. A kata performed as if the trees are watching. They speak little. Their breath is rhythm, their movement prayer. They do not wear the uniform of Meiji. They do not answer to clocks or railways or banks. These are the remnants, men who followed Saigō to the end, or those who watched from the shadows and remembered. In their silence there is mourning. In their discipline there is defiance. And in the forest's quiet embrace, there is space for memory to live. The empire above them grows louder. Trains scream across bridges that once bore horses. Telegraph wires hum above villages. Tokyo gleams with new light, dressed in borrowed fabric from the West. Schools now teach English. Children are taught not to bow too low, not to speak too soft. A nation reformed, sharpened, efficient, rising. But deep in the bamboo, the soul of something older still stirs. They remember Saigō not as history books will say, not merely the rebel who challenged the emperor, not the general who died at Shiroyama, but as a man of conviction, a man who loved too deeply to be silent, a man who could not watch his country grow strong by forgetting who it once was. His name is not spoken in anger here. It is whispered, reverently, like a fallen leaf returned to the roots. Children come sometimes, grandsons of those who lived through the wars, sons of farmers, smiths, fishermen. They crouch at the edge of the clearing, eyes wide, watching the slow sword rise, the soft foot slide. They don't understand all of it. Not yet. But something in their small hearts listens. They carry stories in their blood, even if the books no longer tell them. Their mothers call them home by nightfall. But some nights, in their dreams, they see a mountain wrapped in fog, a man in dark robes standing alone, a final charge into silence, a name etched not in marble but in air. Time moves forward, cities rise, Laws change, statues crumble, but in Kyushu the forest holds its breath. The same wind that once tugged at Saigō's sleeve now whispers through bamboo leaves. The same moon that watched his last steps now watches children sleep. And somewhere, always, there is a clearing where old men move like shadows, where silence is a language, and where every strike of the wooden sword is not for war, but for memory. They do not seek revenge. They do not plot rebellion. Their discipline is a kind of mourning, a kind of prayer, for honor, for sacrifice, for a man who died not because he hated his country, but because he loved it too much to see it forget its soul. At the edge of the forest, the world waits with its noise. But here, time softens. The air smells of moss and earth. The bamboo creaks like old bones. And the echo, faint, steady, moves from foot to foot, breath to breath, story to story. Perhaps it is not history that teaches us, but the echoes we choose to follow. And in another place, far from the bamboo and silence, a different kind of forest rises, of wires and words, of printing presses and truth rewritten. There, a new kind of battle begins, not for land, but for memory. The rain falls gently on Tokyo's stone paths like the softest apology from the sky. It drips from the eaves of the imperial palace, down the collars of passing officers, and onto the cobblestones where footsteps echo with purpose. But in the heart of the empire, something quieter stirs beneath the sound of modern ambitions, an act not of war, but of grace. It is 1889. 12 years have passed since the last charge at Shiro-Yonma. 12 winters since blood soaked the earth around Kagoshima. The Meiji Emperor, now seated firmly atop a transformed nation, signs a document that does not bear swords or treaties, but something softer, a pardon, a posthumous absolution for Saigō Takamori, the man once branded a traitor, the enemy of progress, the rebel whose death helped cement imperial rule, is now, by quiet decree, forgiven. No bells toll, no crowds cheer. The document passes silently from hand to hand, like a letter written to the past. A formal gesture, a necessary one. But somewhere beneath the folds of ceremony, there is something human in it, a heaviness lifted, a sorrow remembered. Forgiveness here is not loud. It is not triumphant. It is the closing of a wound long left open, one stitched not with thread, but with bronze. Later, a statue rises in Ueno Park, not a towering warhorse or a sword raised high, but a simple man in a simple robe walking a dog. Saigō stands barefoot in hunting garb, his gaze calm and unguarded. A samurai stripped of armor, stripped of titles, left only with dignity and memory. It is not a statue of a conqueror. It is a statue of a man who lost, and in losing was never forgotten. Visitors pause before it in the mornings. Women bow, children stare, veterans nod quietly, and sometimes the pigeons rest on his shoulder as if he were simply another old man in the park, watching the future pass by. Bronze does not age, but the people around it do, and still they come, not to celebrate rebellion, but to honor something deeper, the soul of a man who walked into history with his head bowed, not in shame, but in conviction. Forgiveness is a strange kind of memory. It does not erase what was done. It does not change the end, but it softens the edge. It lets the living carry the weight of the dead without breaking. The Emperor's pardon does not bring Saigō back, but it brings his ghost home. From battlefield to hearth, from exile to shrine, and in the quiet corners of Japan, in old tea houses, in wooden schools, in quiet homes where ancestors are still spoken to before sleep, Saigō's name becomes something different. Not a rebel, not a threat, but a man whose heart was too large for the world he was given. A man who chose death not to destroy the future, but to remind it where it came from. Statues are never just about the person they depict. They are about who we need to remember and how we need to feel when we do. In Saigō's statue, there is no fire, no fury. There is peace. A peace forged in loss, not victory. A peace that asks, what do we owe to those who stood in our way? Not out of hatred, but out of love. The children in Ueno Park don't know every detail. They don't remember every law, every speech, every wound of the Satsuma rebellion. But they see the man and feel something still. A pull, a story, a silence that speaks. And sometimes that is enough. Forgiveness is not the end of a story. It is the opening of a space where memory can breathe. A space where statues speak softer truths. Where the bamboo groves in Kyushu are echoed in bronze in the city. Where the past is not rewritten, only carried more gently. And as the empire grows, as the 20th century leans forward into its waiting wars and promises, the statue remains. Not as a warning, not as a celebration, but as a question. What is the worth of a man's heart when measured not by victory, but by the echo he leaves behind? And just beyond the statue's gaze, a printing press begins to stir, inking paper with new voices, bold ideas, and the fragile dream that memory might yet be preserved in words before it vanishes in smoke. Spring comes gently to Japan. Soft winds slip between the branches, carrying the hush of falling cherry blossoms. Petals drift down like old memories, weightless, brief, eternal. In parks and schoolyards, couples and children walk beneath blooming trees, never knowing that each petal once held a story. And somewhere, behind the curtain of history, a man walks quietly through their dreams. He is not alone. He never was. Even now, the name Saigō Takamori stirs something that textbooks cannot hold. Not just dates or battles or rebellion, but longing. A longing for something purer, perhaps. For dignity unbroken, even in defeat. For a time when to fall with honor was not to fall at all. He has become more than a man, more than flesh and sword. He is an idea. Not the sharp kind that governments make and unmake with laws and flags, but the soft kind, quiet as rain on rice fields, steady as footsteps on mountain paths. An idea born not from victory, but from loss. From standing firm when the tide was already turning, from bowing to the future while refusing to forget the past. In this way, Saigō leaves. Not in museums, though his image can be found there. Not in textbooks, though his name fills pages. Not even in statues, though they stand in Ueno Park. In Kagoshima, in the minds of many. He lives in the silence between words. in the pause before a choice, in the stillness of a soldier remembering why he swore an oath, not just to a nation, but to a principle. His story has no neat ending. It cannot, because the questions he leaves behind are not finished. What does it mean to be loyal? To a leader? To a land? To a way of life? What happens when progress demands sacrifice? Not just of comfort, but of identity. Saigō Takamori stood at the knife edge of such questions. He did not answer them. He became them. The man who once led the charge toward modernization would become its most tragic opponent. Not because he changed, but because the world changed faster than honor could follow. Children still read of him in school, but more often they see him in statues, stoic, thick-set, dressed not in armor but in humble robes, walking a dog. The image softens the fire of his rebellion, but it keeps him near. Near enough to remember. Near enough to reimagine. Sometimes the young see his name whispered across old films, painted across battle flags in quiet anime frames, etched in the rhythms of taiko drums that thunder on festival nights. The last samurai, they call him, though he would never call himself that. In life, he did not seek to be the last of anything. He loved his land, not as an artifact, but as something breathing, evolving. He studied Chinese poetry, practiced calligraphy, taught boys the discipline of swords and mines. He was not a relic of a dying world. He was the H of a new one being born too fast. And so he watches still, from somewhere between the bamboo groves and the sea, between shrine gates and bullet trains. Not as a ghost, but as a thread in the great weave of what it means to be Japanese and what it means to be human. Because Saigō's story does not belong only to Japan. It belongs to all who stand on the edge of change and feel the pull of old ways, those who honor their ancestors while walking roads their ancestors never dreamed of. It belongs to those who believe in dignity, even in despair, in grace, even in defeat. It belongs to the child staring at his statue, wondering what it means to die for something invisible. It belongs to the poet writing under moonlight about the weight of memory. It belongs to you, listening now, tracing your finger through the fog of history, feeling something stir beneath the surface. A name, a voice, a quiet courage. The last samurai does not ride into battle anymore. He walks through silence, through spring rain, through temple bells at dusk. He is not the man who lost. He is the man they could not erase. And perhaps that is the real end of his story, not in rebellion, not in death, but in remembrance. In the way the heart softens when it hears his name. In the way a nation bows, not to a victor, but to one who would not let his soul be conquered. And so Saigō walks on, not in armor, not with sword in hand, but with every whispered legend that refuses to fade, with every prayer that rises into the sakura-scented wind, with every soul that chooses integrity even when the world turns away. He lives, not in glory, not in power, but in the quiet echo of memory that still dares to hope. Some figures are not buried in soil, but in story, and from there they rise again. What then do we carry into the next age? Not in our hands, but in our hearts. And so the candle of that night burns quietly in time. Saigō Takamori's footsteps fade into mist, but his silence still lingers. Not the silence of defeat, but of a farewell too noble for words. In the end, it was never about the clash of blades or the roar of war. It was about a man who stood still while the world he loved crumbled, and chose, with grace, to bow to time rather than to break. Tonight, we do not say goodbye to a warrior. We whisper goodnight to a soul who carried honor like a flame in a storm. And though the storm won, the flame still glows here in us. Thank you for sharing this quiet hour with me, for letting this story find its way into your night. In a world of noise, your listening is a kind of devotion, and I'm so grateful you chose to spend these gentle moments here. You are not alone in the dark. Somewhere, someone else is hearing this too, their window flickering softly, their mind drifting over distant hills of memory and time. So now, let the day fall away. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts float like petals down a stream. You've traveled far enough for tonight. Sleep well beneath the hush of history's lullaby, and if you find yourself wanting more stories whispered through the veil of time, you'll always be welcome here. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in. Until next time, may peace be the final word you hear before you dream.